This is atheism in a nutshell. One person says, there's a God. An atheist says, can you prove that? They say, no. The atheist says, I don't believe you then. That's it. That's all it is. You
see, this is a straw man of two different schools of thoughts, both the atheist thoughts, or rather atheism, as well as the Christian worldview. So first, on the atheist side, it's not all there is when an atheist tells you, I don't believe you, with regards to where a God exists or not. There's actually much more sophisticated schools of thought that are for atheism, and these are schools of thoughts that argue that atheism is not just the lack of belief. Most atheists will tell you, no, atheism is just the lack of belief in the existence of God. But no, that is not all there is. At least when you get more sophisticated as it pertains to atheism, right, then you get worldviews that speak into the fact that atheism is the belief that God does not exist. I know most atheists will come to the DMs, or rather will come into the comment section, and they will tell you, no, atheism is just the lack of belief or the lack of faith in the existence of God. But no, more sophisticated atheism, in fact, academic philosophical atheism, argues that atheism in and of itself ought to be defined as the belief that God does not exist, right? Or the belief that the methods by which we've come to acquire knowledge contradict the existence of God, or contradict the hypothesis that God exists. And these are atheists that then go all the way out to prove why God does not exist. Those are much more sophisticated atheists, and those are the people that in most cases are worth engaging. But in most, we still ought to engage this low-tier atheism that still thinks that atheism is simply the lack of belief in God.
See, if you took every holy book there's ever been, every religious book, every bits of spirituality, and hid them or destroyed them, okay? They went away and never, right? And then you took every science book and destroyed that. In 1,000 years' time, those science books would be back exactly the same, because the tests would always turn out the same.
Right.
Those religious books will either never exist or they'd be totally different, because there's no test.
Now we come to the next problem, and this is the reason why. Number one, you'd find that when you examine the evidence that exists for the validity of these particular books, call them religious books, right? Personally, I'm a Christian, so I subscribe to the Abrahamic faith, right, and the Abrahamic religions, right? So the first thing that you would note is that these are historical accounts of God making himself manifest within the realm of humanity. The only thing that would probably change about these books is the nature within which God reveals himself to humanity. If we were to assume that God existed, and if we were to assume that the accounts that have been recorded are pertaining to God making himself manifest to the human population, the human race, you find that even if all these accounts of God were destroyed, you still will be able to have the idea of God lurking around or lurking behind. And the only thing that would change is the way within which God makes himself manifest or revealed to the human population. Because, of course, when God revealed himself in the past, there was a certain cultural context, there was a certain way of life, there was a certain understanding and lens through which these people viewed the world and therefore understood God. So, of course, the way within which that will be recorded would be different. But that in and of itself does not contradict or refute the existence of God thereof, right? Because if God exists and all information and accounts about God making himself manifest to humanity were destroyed, and for some reason, even if it's impossible and impractical, someone found a way to make humanity forget about those past encounters and accounts and experiences. If God existed, and as we Christians do believe that he does, God will make himself manifest to the human population or to the human world, to humanity, in ways that it will be accounted for. It definitely will be different from what the biblical account is, because whilst the biblical account is inscription of how God made himself manifest to humanity, it will definitely differ by virtue of that, because cultures are different, the setting is different, and the lens within which we view the world is also different, so there definitely will be different ways within which it will be recorded that God made himself manifest to humanity. That is number one. But number two, there is archaeological evidence for those accounts about God expressing or making himself manifest to humanity in the past. So when those archaeological artifacts are uncovered, they will write a historical story about those experiences, and those experiences will then shine a light into the historicity of the claims that these biblical accounts make. And assuming everyone completely forgot about God making himself manifest, there will be these cultural trails that will be followed through. I mean, there was various encounters with various other cultures that the Israelites had. So all these would actually still remain, and this would justify or back up the understanding that there was a certain culture that had an encounter with God, and this culture also had their God encounter other cultures, and all of this would then be recorded and be put back together. So there is an extent to which these particular accounts will definitely be rebirthed. Now, onto the science books. You really know for sure, Rick Gervais, that the scientific understanding, or rather our understanding of the science and an understanding of nature has changed over time. So you know that it's probably, and evidentially speaking, highly unlikely that the scientific books will come out the same exact way that they are currently. Because for one, in the past we used to uphold the classical mechanics or the classical way of understanding science, and you'd find that Newtonian mechanics was the science. And now we speak about relativity. What does that tell you? It tells you that the science has been modified, that science has been developed in a manner within which is largely different from how it was in the past. So it's difficult for you to argue that you would get the scientific account the same exact way we have it now, when even at this stage was preserving the historical way of understanding the world. We have a different understanding of the world currently. So it's difficult to re-establish the foundations of science as they were in the past, because again, the methodologies have changed. Again, the culture has changed. Again, the way within which we view things has also changed. So it's difficult to make the argument that all the scientific books would actually come back the way they were, yet religious books won't come out the way they are because God does not exist. So that argument is difficult to make. I think the only thing that arguably we can talk about is most of the books, most of the accounts, most of the way we've written about our understanding of nature would be different, because we have a different culture, we have different contexts, we have different way that we view things, we have different technologies, we have, there's a lot of advancement that has occurred, that these things are bound to change. These things are bound to change. So I don't think this is that got you argument that you thought it was. But if there is any other atheist that really thinks like this, I think you kind of need to improve your way of thought. Anyways, as always, think for yourself, pursue. In fact, put in an effort to actually educate yourself about Christianity, about religious thought, and about the intellectual worldview of Christianity, or I would say apologetics and theology. Don't always simply follow internet atheists because they tell you this and they tell you that, and because they've got great catchphrases. Think for yourself. Don't let nobody else think for you. Have a lovely one. God bless you.